I'm an apple pie.
I am a scoop of ice cream.
I am a cherry.
I'm going to take the scoop of ice cream.
Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Muprov Musings. I'm one of your hosts, Al Munger, and joining me on the line is Julian Bernardo.
Hello, I am your other host, but today we have a very special guest. This guest is the author of Improv Wisdom, one of the books that we've already talked about that we use to inform our own improv ideologies. Patricia, how about you introduce yourself?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Julian and Hal. I'm an old lady that used to teach at Stanford for a very long time, and in the early 90s, I had an improv class at Stanford, and there were a couple of people that just didn't want to stop. So we started a group called the Stanford Improvisers, or the SIMPs. And their purpose, actually, in being founded was to learn the games and exercises of Keith Johnstone and to do theater sports. Actually, that's in our charter. Things have evolved over time, and sometimes the group is doing other things, as we will probably talk about today. And so I wrote that book, Improv Wisdom, and it was published in 2005, almost 20 years ago. And it seems to have been useful to folks because it's in 9 languages, and it's in an ebook and an audiobook, and it's in Russian and a Russian audiobook. So in case you have any Russian friends that you want to send good advice to, I strongly encourage you to get them the audiobook in Russian of Improv Wisdom. So I'm still teaching a little bit here and there. I've got a continuing studies class coming up for Stanford winter quarter, and I'm actually going to see what happens if I go back in the room with people instead of sitting in little square boxes. So we'll see. So that's me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patricia. If you're a keen listener, you'll remember that the Stanford Improvisers is the group that Hal and I were a part of, and how we met and how we started doing improv together. So, Patricia, you've created a very important thing to both of our lives.
Well, that pleases me. I consider the Simps my children. And so you're kind of among the senior group of those going on and spreading the gospel of goodness, of improvness, and all the things it can do and help, et cetera. So I did want to tell you that I listened to the making of a new play, and I caught one of the first one, and then I've listened to your podcast. So I'm kind of up to speed almost. I didn't have time to do all of the shows, but I'll probably go back and take a look if we want to end up talking about that. But I'm at your disposal now. Whatever topics you'd like to riff on, I'm here for you.
So the main topic that we have for today that kind of can encompass a lot of these different things is the maxim from your book, Be Average, which is the 5th maxim, because I feel like that is something that feels very, like, when I think of Patricia Ryan Madson, a lot of the maxims in the book say yes is very common in other schools of improv, but I like to try to trace things, and Be Average is one of these kind of strange ones that I wasn't sure where that came from. And that was my opening question of, is this something you invented? Is this something you got from someone else, or like where? How did being average become central to being great at improv?
I wish I had the good sense to create that myself, but I am the devotee student of the master Keith Johnstone. Keith Johnstone first said, be average. And of course, everybody rolled their eyes and thought it was revolutionary and whatnot. And over time, it began to make sense. I had another teacher named David K. Reynolds, who is a psychologist and someone who is world's leading expert on Japanese psychologies. And the way he parsed it was be ordinary. or you are ordinary. So embrace that, that there's something about be average, be ordinary, just, give up all this striving that ends up being extremely helpful in a lot of areas, certainly in the arts. Or if you think about education today, of course, everyone is told to excel. And so the word we get from the get-go is be your best, get straight A's, you're not going to get on in the world unless you excel. And so there's some way in which that advice, which is probably well-meaning, ends up kicking us in the butt, because when we're striving for being excellent or interesting or funny, as soon as we try to reach a particular kind of goal, we're not in touch with our fundamental humanness. So, and that's really where I have jumped into this discussion, because what happens on an improv stage is, I think, is more interesting to you two than it may be to me. Improv performance has never been something that I have excelled at. I've never done it. So, it's much too scary getting on stage without knowing what you're going to do. But what is of interest is how that Maxim and some of the other ones help us in everyday life. And to give you an example of how that gets sort of morphed into everyday life, I have a group of friends on the coast side where I live in El Granada, California, south of San Francisco. And I believe, Hal, you're talking to us today from the Big Apple, yes?
Yes, yeah.
And Julian, where are you today?
I'm in Stockton, California.
Stockton, okay. Yeah. So it's hot where you are.
Right.
Or will be as the day goes on, yeah, okay. So here on El Granada, before the pandemic shut all the doors on everybody talking to each other in the flesh, we had a group the first Friday of every month called Bad Art Night. And it was a gathering at one of our friends' house, a wonderful artist, Laura McHugh, who does all kinds of things, quilting and watercolor and you name it, she does it. So on the Friday in question, all of her friends or any of us who wanted to would show up, sometimes bringing some cookies or a bottle of wine, and we'd bring our whatever art project we were working on, and we'd sit around and schmooze and gossip and have a good time while making bad art. Because we all knew we could do that. So it got us together, which actually brought us into the room like one of the other Maxims, just show up. And the problem some people have with making any kind of art or theater is they think themselves to death in advance and they never show up to do it. So you wisely pointed out I think in the first podcast that showing up was the prerequisite to anything. And I totally agree with that. It's whether it's showing up for bad art night, and occasionally, sometimes the art turns out good despite your best efforts to make it bad. And we all have had examples of when we're trying to do our best when it just puts the kibosh on what we're trying to do. We gotta really nail that interview. So we get all stressed and we lose the person that we are naturally, who is the one probably the interviewer really wants to hire, rather than someone who's showing off or reciting their prepared responses. I had one of a former simp, Vince Ritchie, who lives in Japan, and wonderful fellow. His business is coaching people to get into colleges, and he said that the single thing that interviewers hate the most is the prepared speech. And we all know when somebody is speaking the prepared speech, it has a sound that's different than human communication. So if the interviewer says, tell me the three things you're good at. So I think my goal in life through improv is to help people trust themselves more, allow themselves more freedom to try stuff and do stuff, whatever that stuff is, and they have a good time along the, enjoy the ride and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're talking about this mentality that a lot of people have, like the rush, 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 got to be the best mentality. You taught at Stanford for many years and, continuing the continuing studies program. Did you find, I mean, it's my expectation that Stanford students in particular might have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder there. Yeah. Was it any particular difficulty working with Stanford students, or were they particularly relieved when they learned these things?
Well, it's interesting. I think for the undergraduates, where I was teaching for a long time, since 1977, it was a relief, and they I don't think they believed me at first. Because you can say to someone, "Be average, but you better be good," and there's that threat in the background of your grade or whatever, your comparison. But I think being in an improv class where we accept what everybody does, we start by standing in a circle throwing sound balls, and we don't discriminate and say, no, somebody already used that sound, or something stupid like that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had someone that contacted me by email about wanting to study improv, and she found a teacher somewhere, and she emailed me back. She says, "I don't know, maybe I'm not really up for this improv stuff, because everything I do, the teacher I've got corrects me." She says, no, that's wrong. And I sucked in my breath and thought, well, you might look for another teacher. There are different ways to teach improv, but if somebody is correcting you every quarter of a second, I don't know what kind of improv they're teaching. So acceptance and modeling that acceptance is really key. But I would have to say that I had a group once called the Distinguished Careers Institute at Stanford. And these are very important people. They had to be distinguished enough to get into the Distinguished Careers Institute. And I think they had a little trouble, or some of them had a little trouble with that idea. But overall, I think it's a relief. There aren't many Stanford faculty members that are going to tell you whatever you do in this class is going to be okay.
Yeah.
As long as you don't hurt someone physically.
Right.
You have to get a disclaimer around accept all offers except punching somebody in the face or tripping them up or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly felt relief. The first improv class I had at Stanford was right after an extremely difficult math class. So it was a very good transition.
Your teacher Dan Klein or Lisa Rowland?
Dan.
It was Dan. Great.
Yeah.
He's really he's one of a kind. He really knows this work from a deep moral position. And I think you were lucky to study with him, frankly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I remember also my first class with Dan Klein. He mentioned be average in the first class, and I really wanted to like say something to him after the class, because I had been told that you needed to go up to Dan at the end of the class in order to try to just have him see you, and because the class is over enrolled.
Right.
And I don't really think this was necessarily the right take on be average at all. But at the time, coming into freshman year, very much wanting to be the best that I possibly could be at improv, my attitude towards this maxim was, okay, you just need to try to make everyone else around you as good as possible if you want to be average. I think I've grown since then, but at least there is some truth of if you are going to be some person who's going to be pushing it, like trying to push yourself will not help the ensemble or make the play better. You need to get everyone.
Well, you bring out something really important, because one of the ways you're a good improviser and to help with that maxim is to raise the status of those around you. And how do we raise the status of each other? We listen, and we listen, we pay attention to them. We find ways to let them know that we think they're pretty great whenever possible. You can practice this. for example, at the grocery store, or when you're in a line, like checking out at for lunch or something, besides saying thanks to the person that takes your money or your card there, start noticing what they're doing before you get to the point where they've made the transaction, and see if you can't comment on something like, wow, I noticed you've been standing on your feet all day. I really appreciate that you're doing a good job at that. Thank you. So not just thanks, but noticing what other people do. And I think that average probably sounds like a bad word, when it turns out, if you're average, you're more likely to be part of the human race, in my judgment anyway. It's hard to be around people who are superstars, unless you just want to take selfies or something.
Yeah. What other ways do you have for, because what's unique about that story is you're rewarding average behavior, which oftentimes does not get the same level of like attention and reward from people. Do you have any ways that you do that for your students, like of noticing when they're doing something average or behaving in an average way? And
well, let me just say, the whole problem with the word average is it's a comparison to something. It's not just, something isn't just average a priori, it's average in relationship to something else or something that could be worse. So it means that the mind is evaluating what's going on. And I think what we want to actually do is get out of the mind's way of making those judgments, good, bad, indifferent, average, above average, etc. That comparing gets us in a lot of trouble all the time. But it's what human minds do. Almost everything that happens, my mind is saying, I like that. I didn't like that. Oh, my husband's music is too loud. Don't like that. Oh, I do like what the music is. And so things are going on and I'm evaluating them. What I'm trying to learn to do, and I'm still trying to learn to do this because my mind likes to make that judgment. Love the music, hate the volume. What I'm trying to learn to do is step back when my mind makes that evaluation, take a breath and notice what just happened and just be with it. Acceptance. If I wrote a second book, it would just not have 13 maxims, but it would have 4 because nobody I know can remember all 13. So the 4 things you need to remember, the first one is attention to what's going on. What is out there that, besides what's in my mind, what I want, and all about me, attention to reality. And then acceptance, the second A, you're all 4 A's. Attention to what's going on, noticing what it actually is, accepting it, doesn't mean liking it. I think you probably I didn't get through all the podcast about yes and stuff, but so I'm going to accept it. Doesn't necessarily mean I like it, but I'm going to hold it. And then I'm going to appreciate it. The third thing we do once we've seen something, accepted it, is we find the good, or what is it in this thing that I'm looking at or being with that is useful. And then the fourth A is action. That's when I respond. All this happens in real time at the same moment in a way. Attention, acceptance, appreciation, and action. And then it allows me to go forward. In one of the shows, I noticed somebody made an offer about it was Jake, that he had a new album that was coming out, some new music, and then the musicians started repping up, and they made this great song happen.
Yeah.
It was a moment where I thought, what a great offer! All right, and I was expecting you to sing the song. But you did something else. I'm not, and that was perfectly fine too. It was like offers come up, but sometimes we don't we don't notice them as offers because we may be somewhere else. I don't know. it sounds like a criticism, but it was just, it went through my mind. And then I thought, no, actually, Julian, or he has, his choice in that moment was just as valid. And cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know that these 4 A's kind of apply more generally to life, I imagine, but I always find myself in that position in improv scenes, thinking about someone quite often will just say something that I don't expect them to say, or I'm thinking is maybe I'm a little bit like judgy as like my default state. I'm like, oh, that doesn't necessarily fit into the world.
Right.
But I've been trying more recently to, try to accept these things and see them as positive.
See what happens if at that moment where you sort of don't like, we have it all the time, that moment, don't quite like that, or this isn't quite right. You can do it with your breath. You can stop, take a breath, and just kind of detach for a moment. Then maybe an impulse will come to follow it in some other way. I'm trying to do this in life all the time, especially with those moments that are, I don't like this. Do I have another choice? I always have another choice in my response. A favorite example of this is I used to go to this Snap gym where all these equipment and everything, and everybody in there bulking up and doing the bars and whatnot, and there was one guy that seemed to come in every day that I was there, and he was on the treadmill, and he made so much noise. And he would huff and puff, and bam, bam, bam. I thought, if that guy would just shut up, my life would be a lot better. He was always annoying me. Well, it was constant, because every time I came in was, oh, there he is again. And at some point it came to me, you have a choice, Patricia. He's doing what he's doing, but you have a choice about whether you, how you respond to that for yourself. So if you can just try something different besides, I hate that, I wish he'd go away. And I did. So I tried something. Oh, there's that guy again, having a big workout. And I just shifted my attention onto, I guess, what I was doing at the moment. Could I do this a little better or something? And it was interesting to me how that annoyance sort of gently dissipated. It wasn't there pounding on me like, I hate this guy. And so the older I get, the more I try to see if I can't work with my own negative thoughts and set them aside. I don't have to fix them. I don't have to fix that guy. I don't have to change the world. I can't. Does all that make sense?
Yeah. That also that's starting to get into the Zen side of things as well, which I wanted to ask you about. I very sort of briefly talked about Mu as no, but fundamentally what it means is nothing, and it gets into the whole practice of being present, being okay with not doing anything to change your environment, and it's sort of accepting what is going on around you. And I kind of wanted to ask you both. Well, I guess I have two questions. One of them is, what is your background and relationship to Japan? Because you've mentioned it a couple of times already, and I think it would be interesting for the listeners. And two, like, how do you balance the sort of inaction and acceptance with the action, and those 2 A's of like the being okay with allowing nothing to happen and not trying to like do something crazy all the time versus doing what needs to be done?
Well, you sort of just answered it there, because it's what needs to be done that needs to be done. And we often react, and I don't know why, what makes us do something crazy, or what I think Johnstone might say, I think I do know it, might say it's out of fear. When we get a little bit frightened about something or not being okay, we're more likely to do something than just be with that. And so I don't think Mu, even for the Zen Buddhist, means just always doing nothing. It's well, there are all kinds of Zen and all kinds of Buddhism. A quick answer to your question is, from the time I was 10, I was interested in world religions. And I lived in Richmond, and I got my family to allow me to go to all the different churches. And in Richmond, those different churches were about 7 different Christian churches. There was a Jewish synagogue, and I think that might have been all. There were no Buddhist temples or Shinto shrines or anything like that. So I started looking at I loved religions. I never met one I didn't like somehow. When I moved to California, I realized besides all those Christian churches that I got to attend, and I would pretend I was a Catholic and take communion, even though I wasn't. I was an early actress trying to play the role. But when I got to California, I found out that there was, Buddhism. There are about 10 kinds of different Buddhism you could look at or try to practice or study. And there was Sufism. Oh, Sufism was great because the Sufis sort of believed in everybody. And there was the Sikhs, and there were Hindus and Muslims, and a world of different religions. So I have been on a kind of a spiritual quest of studying all of them and practicing them from time to time. I was a board member of the San Francisco Zen Center and for 10 years. And so I have never identified with a single Buddhist thing, but the other part of my connection to Japan was an organization called Omoto, O-O-M-O-T-O, which is one of the sects of Shinto religion that believe that art or the arts are the mother of religion. And I went over to Japan every summer for about 10 years and attended a month-long seminar where we studied tea ceremony, calligraphy, martial arts, and no drama, and lived like Japanese students, wearing the geta and the kimono and eating rice and miso soup for breakfast. So I've had some experience living in Japan and being part of a culture that recognized the value of the arts in everyday life. So all of that sort of pastime and interest in world religions kind of gets folded in with my improv teaching and whatnot. And I managed to, drop little Zenicisms here and there, I suppose, hopefully not harmfully. But yeah, so there's part of just my way of looking at the world that comes through. So it's not, I think that those philosophical and psychological ideas are, to me, as important as the improv ones. Improv for me has been a kind of a vehicle. It's the little form I use to teach mindfulness or some of these other things that I think are good ways to be in the world, and that eventually save you a lot of suffering, because that's what the Buddha says, that the first rule of everything is that life is suffering. Okay. We all know about that, but there's an end to suffering too. And that comes if you can learn to kind of just be with what is. Sounds very easy, but it isn't.
Yeah, I'm interested, Hal, I didn't want to veer away from this topic if you still had things here. Cool. Yeah, I was interested in the improv, like lifestyle versus improv performance difference. And as I understand it, like earlier in your career, when teaching like TAPS 103 and whatnot, and, coaching the Stanford Improvisers, you were more involved with like these performers. But as I understand it now, your continuing studies, I imagine a lot of the people in the classes are more into it for the lifestyle reasons, less likely to actually join a troupe and perform. Mm-hmm. How do you find it different teaching to these different people? And are there different struggles that one might have that the other might not?
Well, it's a really important point, because I think one's purpose often is the contributing factor to what kind of experience you have. So if people sign up for my class because they've heard I'm a Stanford teacher and wrote a book and everything, and their purpose is performance improv, they may be disappointed because what we're going to be doing in class are a lot of different exercises that demonstrate different mindsets, ways of doing things. And sometimes we'll end up doing a short scene or something that illustrates that experience. But even when we get to the end of my class, my students aren't prepared by me to do scenes at all. I don't really know how to teach that. Partly because I've never done it, and there are people all around that are very good at teaching you something about showing up. I mean, there are games like making sure when you get on stage that everybody knows who you are, where you are, what's the relationship, what is that acronym they use to teach that concept. I think what happens is I use the same games that are used to teach the fundamental concepts, but unlikely after we've done something to ask the students, how is that, does that apply to anything in your life? Or because the book got written because of some continuing studies, adults that said, you know, after this yes class and looking at the power of yes, and I started using it a little bit with my wife and kids and my boss, and he says, it's really amazing how people respond to you when you open yourself to them. You should write a book about this. So it was at that point when that person said that to me that I realized what we're doing here can be a mindset, a philosophy, a way of doing things that's really practical. And that's what I know more about, because along with the years that I was teaching at Stanford, I'm also a constructive living instructor. And what that means is constructive living is a life way based on two Japanese psychologies, Morita psychotherapy and Nikon psychotherapy, which I have studied with various teachers, and I'm certified to teach this mindset. And so that gets woven in with my many years working with Keith Johnstone and his using improv games, because he wanted to create actors who weren't afraid and who were in touch with their natural intelligence. Actually, Johnstone's mission around things is very similar to what I understand yours is with Muprov in a way. There's some fundamental differences, though, which at some point I'd be happy to talk to you about, or which brings up the subject of narrative or story. I think I'm going to circle back for a moment about this. It also goes to the question of purpose. There's a bit of a discussion that was Julian's side was not finished when Hal made a few remarks about his views of the audience, or his sort of how he feels about the audience, or what the improviser actor's relationship should be to the audience. What do they owe the audience anything? Or it was anyway. And Hal said, I don't think Julian agrees with me. So I want to have this conversation at some point about the audience, because I think there are, it goes to your purpose in doing improv at all, because you can do improv for its own sake, art for art's sake. It doesn't matter what the audience is or whether there's even anybody there, because there's value in improvising together in an artful sort of way. So you could argue that that's my purpose, is to get together groups of people who learn these skills and who want to spend their time playing together for the high you get from doing this work. There's an improv book you might not have heard of. It was published 25 years ago or something. And the title is called Something Like a Drug. And it's the history of improv in Chicago improv. And they use that title because they point out that the improv experience is often euphoric. It's so exciting and fun to do it and play and have it work and be on stage making stuff up, etc. That there's and one becomes addicted to doing that with other people who want to do that. That's a whole other, in my mind, a whole other story or a whole other purpose than deciding to do long form for an audience. Unless the audience is actually invited just to see to see you work together, and that's another thing, because people might like to, especially other improvisers might like to come and watch that work.
Yeah.
Are you with me on this?
Yeah. I mean, Hal and I can debate about this for hours on end, but I guess my thought on it is that it is kind of a different art form when you are performing with an audience. And just because in like a small way they are contributing to what's happening on stage, and maybe small is reductive. Maybe it's a large way through their reactions and whatnot, that we're taking in that energy. So I guess my response to the idea of you just doing it as an art form with the other people that love to do the art form is that I guess it feels like there's something missing without, obviously, you're practicing without an audience, but when you're performing, I feel the audience is quite important for that reason, at least.
Okay, why? When you're performing for an audience, why is that important?
Because I guess an addendum here would be that hopefully a reactive audience or an engaged audience, because I think just seeing their faces, hearing like the noises they make, whether it's laughs or oohs or ahs, it informs us on what they are finding interesting. And through like hearing that, I think for me, at least, it makes me want to explore that more. And yeah, I guess that's the main part of it. There's something I always talk about after shows about like the energy in that show was crazy, or the energy in that room was way different. And I think that often comes down to the audience, how much they're giving to us. And I think if we're talking about the euphoria, I feel like I get a better high when we have the audience as sprinkled on top.
Interesting. So there's not any sort of contractual thought that the purpose of doing it is to tell them a story or to give them some entertainment or to in some way I don't know what's the purpose of theater.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to some degree it feels like we should be telling a story to them, and especially when we get into this longer form improv, there's like practical constraints about like we should be getting them out of here, this is going on too long, which might be one of the biggest improviser audience clashes, because we always want to keep it going and they might not want to keep watching.
Okay, so it goes to who's this for? If it's for you the performers, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think this is something for me to personally evaluate within myself, is I guess who we're doing it for, because I definitely feel like on a whole, doing it more for myself and for the improvisers, but certainly in the moment for these shows, I'm making decisions where, you could probably say that was for the audience.
Your thoughts, Hal?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Want to get into this?
In terms of who is for, definitely there are some people who come back to a bunch of shows, and I feel like with the new play thing, it was just such a weird thing where really, if you came on any night, you kind of missed what we were doing, and I felt there was an extreme reward to both the people in the cast or who were playing music or on the lights or sound, who like were witnessing what was going on in the sort of evolution of it. And I think that my parents came to all 4 nights, so I feel like they kind of got a sense of what was going on. But we were intentionally doing something that was likely to fail multiple times.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there are certain nights where just kind of each one has something unique about it that's really interesting, where we learned a ton from it. But
Mhm.
I kind of knew that there were going to be some audiences who were going to come in and just see a show that didn't work. And I was just kind of banking on that there were going to be some nights where it really, really did work. And that was kind of maybe a dangerous thing in terms of building an audience long term, and maybe something that I should think more about. But I did feel like there were moments where, and maybe this is the opposite of being average. And being average was always part of why this maxim sticks for me, is because it always is kind of at conflict with what I was trying to do, which is something that I hadn't really seen be done before, and playing in a way that was very different from how other people play. And some of the nights I think really failed because we weren't being average for some part of them. There hit a point where everyone was suddenly nervous. We'd put in so much more time than we usually did. And we had a lot of pressure on things to be interesting or original. And it would just tank the energy. And suddenly there would be a freezing, and it was just much harder to play. On the night where we most hit the kind of like joyous, we're just going out here and doing stuff, was the last night. I think partly because it was like, well, we already have done all the stuff. Like, we're just going to have fun now and play. And it's hard to find a balance between, like, it was really cool to push us to a place where when we were average, we were doing all these new things that we had never done before, and it was natural and flowing. But in order to get there, it required some, and I think the important thing was the knowing when to stop thing. There was a certain point where I realized that if I kept on pushing, we were gonna not, like, the show itself might not even get across the finish line, let alone work at all. And where we kind of had to be like, okay, just whatever happens, happens. But I don't know. It is a challenging. I think this is one of the hardest skills to build in improv, especially if you really have a lot of the other skills down, is be average, because you're working so hard to build all these other skills, and to intentionally let go of all of that and be like, I'd put in all this work, and now
I think that let me just say that I think that could be a trap. That if somehow in the midst of doing what you're doing, your mind is saying, "Oh, I'm not average," or you're evaluating, and your mind ought to be not thinking about whether you're average or not, but might be thinking about what your character needs, or what somebody says they were going to do. Overall, I think one of the things I want to commend you all on is it's clear to me that the players in this A New Play weekend had incredible improv skills, had incredible stage presence, and the ability to listen and respond. Amazing. And that is a fundamental thing that a lot of groups don't have. They don't slow down enough to listen to each other. But yes. And so that all of the tools are there. I would love to see your same group try different sorts of formats, where, in a way, so much freedom, which is, you had freedom to do anything, in terms of you could be anywhere, any possible location in the world, any kinds of characters. There were so many options that to be honest and true, it's hard to get something nailed down. And I think you begin to understand why some of these formats, which either start with a suggestion, or you have a location, or something is known, or there is part of the format, like a genre system, where you're doing, like you did the Sims did with the musical, that you have some kind of a parameter that helps you focus and find the story. And so that the embarrassment of riches of being able to deal with anything and make it into something, then can become a limitation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Hal, this is another kind of thing that Hal and I might butt heads on sometimes. Is I think we have some disagreements on like formats where maybe a lot is decided beforehand, or like there's more restriction versus these more free formats. And I think it would be so fun, Hal, to try using the new play skills on something that's very not new play, quote unquote.
Well, yeah, I think what might be fun, because I think what is healthy about your having different positions on this is terrific. Hal, you need Julian. Julian, you need Hal. And to keep moving this vision forward that you have. And what might be fun would be to try what is the effect of some limitations. And I think that overall, you prove to me that the group can do anything or play any style or have any kind of relationship. What I didn't see yet is story, is somehow what does a story means that there's something, whether it's in the hero's journey, that there's something that we'll know when it's over because something has been accomplished or not. Someone has fallen in love or not, someone's been killed or not, that we have, and that was, I think you said, sometimes we go on too long because we didn't have that end point that had to happen. We hadn't set it up so we'd know when the ending was. And that's, I think, that could happen. That could be corrected by any number of sorts of things. But you've got all the tools. I've never seen a group with more stuff going for you. Wonderful players, great kind of camaraderie between the women in the group are terrific too. Golly, I'm just incredibly impressed. But the B average you might want to let that go. Johnstone said anytime he found a rule that was true, the opposite of it was true too. So that sounds like a cop-out in a way, but do you know what I mean, Hal?
That I know exactly what you mean, and I love that Johnstone said that, because I had not heard him say that before, but that is I am constantly saying things, and then later someone will like hold me to them, or be like, wait, try to make a logical inference off of them, of like, expect me to behave in a certain way. And I'm like, well, the opposite of what I was saying is also true. So and part of the be average thing of like is just where do you want your average to be, and making sure your average is good. Like, your group is going to have a bunch of different people in it, and like, I feel like our average landed in a really good place, and maybe I'm not necessarily where the average is, and certainly the direction that I need to go if I was going to improve would be towards the average. But having me over here makes it so that when everyone else is being average, they wind up in a place that is kind of interesting.
Well, we may be using language in a funny way. If average is things that are human or realistic, and what's not average is fried mermaids and wild stuff, which is it's very easy to do the wild stuff, and maybe that's something interesting to make the audience laugh or give them something to watch. And fear of not keeping, I think the need to keep the audience interested is real. I don't think that's kind of a false claim. If somebody's come and they've paid for a ticket, I'm great to watch the experiment happen. But I do think finding some kind of narrative thread, because an audience is always trying to put together what's going on. The thing that you're doing on stage, which is creating something out of the moment, the audience is doing that too. Okay, who are they? Why are they sitting there? with their feet dangling in the pond. What's their relationship to each other? What's going to happen? And so we're working just as hard as the improvisers are to see. It's helpful when you give them some tidbits of content or of plot.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if you end up watching the nights 2 and 4. They're the one, or particularly like night 4 is like, okay, we kind of had a structure early on of like, this is just going to happen on Halloween, and that was then it was more of like, okay, here is the story of the night. The night ends when the night ends, and also on the second night, it begins with almost a sort of prophecy. It says it begins on a birthday and it ends on one too. I think Jada and Simran each say one half of that line. And having those kind of bookends was really, really helpful.
Good. Yeah.
That was one of the things that we were trying to work on that we didn't always hit was if you want to do improv that is less structured, you need to be able to establish a structure and to invent a structure on the spot. And we kind of did that with nights. Night 1, it was clear that it was going to be kind of jumping around in time, but it was very loose, and it wasn't. It definitely wasn't like there was a clear structure of here's where we're going. And same with night 3, we knew it was going to be a narrative story about these people, but it was super unclear what kind of story it was going to be or where it was going to go. And it eventually kind of or what genre it was in, or what like I don't know, like it did sort of lack some of the cohesion that can be added by a clear definition.
One kind of way, given that totally open format, is if a scene starts with a couple of characters sort of being human together, whoever is standing in the wings should, the third person on could be responsible for setting the plot. What is the problem that's going to try to be solved here, or and because the two people that are just relating to each other naturally, I loved watching that. I wanted somebody to come in and throw a wrench into it, or it's in the same story structure. Once upon a time, there was blah, 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 and every day, blah, blah. You were all really good at getting the everyday until one day, so that someone comes in and throws a wrench into it that now is going to allow you to have story for the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Julian and I love throwing wrenches. That's
you're talking
to the right. You're talking to the right two people.
You need them. You really do. Yeah, I can see.
We're winding down on time. So Julian, I was wondering if you've got any burning things you wanted to get in.
Should we tease Hero's Journey?
Oh yeah. All right, and just before we go, this is the last mindset-based episode. After this, we're going to be jumping right into teaching you how to put your very own Hero's Journey show.
Yeah, the Hero's Journey show. We've already talked about it a little bit, but this will be a narrative show in which you have a hero going through some sort of journey, hopefully learning something about themselves, growing, defeating some evil, whether it be physical, magical, or mental. And yeah, it's the podcast is going to look a little bit different for the next several episodes as we piece by piece teach you this format. Yeah, well, we don't want to keep you too long. Thank you so much for coming out and talking. This is improv candy for us. We love to chat, especially about the origins, and a lot of the mindset stuff is super relevant.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And if this is improv candy, don't get diabetes on it.
Yeah, I'll have my improv vegetables too.
Absolutely. That's important. So I guess I'll leave you now and go on, and thank you for letting me be part of your new podcast. I'll look forward to listening to other episodes. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Patricia.
I mean, we could use the summer stock as the sign off.
Yeah, we could. I would be down. Okay. So I was doing some research for this episode, and I stumbled across something called the Stanford Improv Summer Stock. And I had never heard of this. And just as a bit of lore for the Simps, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, the Stanford Summer Improv was Keith Johnstone, at my invitation, would come to the Bay Area. I met him in 1980 at the Esalen Institute, where he was teaching with my Tai Chi master. And his book, Impro, had just been published in 1979. So he liked the Bay Area, and I would host him to do workshops for the San Francisco Zen Center, and also he came to start to interact with the BATS people. I sort of introduced Keith to the local BATS gang. Yeah, so Keith said he could come for a week in August, and I thought, great, we'll have him come, and we'll have a week-long summer intensive with Keith holding court for the morning from 9 until noon. He'd be on stage pontificating, being himself, and people would come up and do stuff. And then in the afternoon, we had a class, mask class with Winter Mead, and we had musical class with Barbara, and three or four of the BATS teachers did individual classes. So anyone through continuing studies could come and take this week-long improv intensive. And it was really successful. And in fact, members of the engineering department, faculty, came to sit at the foot of Keith Johnstone. And so the improv intensive, what do we call it? Was it workshop?
The only phrasing I saw on it was summer stock.
Summer stock, okay. Yeah. It wasn't summer stock, but it was 5 days and nights of Keith Johnstone in the morning, other teachers in the afternoon, and in the evening we did some theater sports or played some games and stuff for audiences. And that went on for 2 years, sponsored by Continuing Studies, and it was wildly successful. But I didn't have the time or the juice to keep it going, so I turned it over to BATS. And Bay Area Theater Sports then started inviting Keith once a year in August and doing the same thing of having him in the morning and other teachers in the afternoon. And so that began a wonderful ongoing educational thing. In fact, right now, this very weekend, I believe, or this is Monday. So Friday and Saturday, BATS was doing things we learned from Keith Johnstone, and they had some of the old timers who were there demonstrating some of the stuff that came to us all through him. He's the great lineage underneath Stanford Improvisers and me and others that have gone before. And what I have to say too about teaching performance is that I knew I was not the person to help the Stanford Improvisers get better on stage. I just don't have the skills. I really don't know how to do that. I'm not being modest. But I would be able to invite Barbara Scott and Rafe Chase, and Steve Kieran came and taught the Simps space object work. He's an absolute master of creating things in space. And so because BATS had a whole raft of wonderful teachers who were skilled at stage improvising, at Stanford, I could just bring them in and they would teach classes for the Simps. And I got to watch and learn too. It was wonderful. So
that
thanks for asking
awesome.
about that. Yeah, that summer thing, it kind of got lost, but it's still going on in a way. Not with Keith having passed this year, he's not part of it, but BATS, I think, had a summer intensive where they their own teachers also honored Keith Johnstone's work and stuff. Yeah, I love talking with you guys. You're brilliant. And I'm going to go back and spend some more time. I'm going to see the fourth the fourth night, I saw the end of it. I skipped through it, and I saw the end ended in a wonderful dance, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great when you can get to when it comes together like that, and everybody's celebrating, and we're not struggling to find out what comes next.
Yeah.
See me now, I should thought you cared. All these times they're changing. Oh, and my mind is rearranging. Can't you see me now? Like you always did. Can't you see me now? I just wanna be with you. When the times they seem so crazy, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? I remember way back when, oh, and times they are changing, you know, things are rearranging. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now?